What if I told you there's a simple math trick that can predict exactly how long it takes for your money to double without needing a big salary, luck, or inheritance? Wealthy investors have relied on it for decades, and you can learn it today. It's called the Rule of 72. More importantly, you'll see how a quick calculation shows that even small monthly contributions can grow into life-changing sums over time. And if you've ever felt stuck living paycheck to paycheck, this is for you. Because before the formula changes everything, we need to look at why saving alone leaves so many people feeling broke. For many people, the hard part isn't saving, it's realizing that saving alone doesn't move the needle. Gabriel's story shows us clearly. At 28, he was doing what most financial advisors tell you to do, working a steady job, living within his means, and putting aside $300 every month. He rented a modest apartment, drove an older car, and never spent beyond his paycheck. Over several years, that discipline grew his balance into thousands. On paper, it looked like progress, but when Gabriel stepped back and looked at his actual life, the picture didn't match the numbers. The problem was simple, but discouraging. Even with money piling up in his account, he never felt any less strapped. Rent kept creeping higher, groceries stretched further into his budget, and health costs consumed a little more each year. The gains in his account weren't giving him breathing room because prices outside that account were quietly rising faster. His savings added up, but his purchasing power wasn't improving. It felt like running in place. And for someone who had faithfully followed the rules, that was deflating. Here's where the math tells the real story. Savings accounts only grow at modest rates. Even if you're lucky enough to find one offering close to 6%, the outcome isn't impressive. If Gabriel started with $10,000, he'd wait 12 years for it to double to $20,000. That's 12 years just to see his money multiply one time. And if inflation runs even a few percent a year, that supposed doubling turns into a much smaller real-world gain. The dollars go up, but what those dollars can actually buy doesn't keep pace. This is why so many careful savers feel like they're doing everything right but still falling behind. Safety without growth is stagnation. Gabriel thought his discipline would eventually buy him financial freedom, but the truth was, his savings account had become a holding pen for money that wasn't working hard enough. Each deposit felt like moving forward, but rising costs pulled the ground out from under him. That frustration boiled down to a question he couldn't shake. If saving isn't enough, what else is there? For Gabriel, the answer didn't come from earning more or taking risky chances. It came in a conversation with someone who pointed out a simple mental shortcut investors have leaned on for decades. A rule so straightforward you can use it on the back of an envelope, yet powerful enough to completely shift how you see the value of your money over time. This was the moment Gabriel heard about a two-digit number that explained everything. At first it seemed too simple to matter, but it would reveal why his careful saving had felt like spinning wheels and how the same effort directed differently could change his trajectory. The idea Andreas shared with Gabriel was known as the Rule of 72, a simple shortcut investors have respected for decades. It isn't hidden in textbooks or reserved for experts. It's a two-digit formula that gives anyone a clear window into how money can multiply over time. For Gabriel, hearing about it sounded almost too simple, which is why it caught his attention immediately. At first, he wondered if it could really be that straightforward. Most financial concepts seem wrapped in jargon or spreadsheets, but Andreas explained that this was meant to cut through the complexity. The Rule of 72 is easy. Take the number 72 and divide it by the annual return you expect on your investment. The answer shows the number of years required for your money to double. That's the entire formula. No financial degree needed, only middle school math skills. Take a second and try it now with a number in your head. Divide 72 by the return you imagine earning each year, and you'll see in an instant how many years it would take for your money to double. Let's look at an example with a higher return. Suppose you earn a 12% annual return using the formula 72, 12, 4, 6. That means your money doubles every 6 years. Think about starting with $10,000. After just 6 years, that grows into $20,000 with no extra deposits. 6 years may feel like a long stretch, but pause and consider. 6 years ago might feel like yesterday. For an investment, that yesterday was enough time to turn 10,000 into 20. Now compare that outcome with a slower return. If you earned 8% annually instead, divide 72 by 8 and you get 9. In this case, your money doubles every 9 years. On paper, 6 years versus 9 years doesn't appear dramatic. But, over the span of decades, the gap widens into a difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's the core lesson. Seemingly small variations in return speed up or slow down the doubling process in ways that are obvious when you measure them this way. Here's why the rule of 72 is so valuable. It moves the conversation away from high salaries or lucky breaks and points directly to time and patience. Whether you're starting with a few thousand or a few million, the math applies equally. What matters is the rate of return, and how consistently you let compounding work in the background. For Gabriel, this realization was freeing. His modest income wasn't a limitation. His real obstacle had been not knowing how to measure growth in the first place. This perspective puts control back in your hands. Instead of looking at wealth as something mysterious or out of reach, you can actually predict what steady returns accomplish. If you know your average yearly return, you can estimate, not guess, how your money expands. And while it's an approximation, the accuracy is good enough to frame decisions in a way that feels far more concrete than blind saving. For Gabriel, the shift was immediate. No longer did he view his savings account as an endpoint. Each dollar he invested became part of a timeline heading toward the next doubling. Each block of years was another milestone, bringing him closer to building real momentum. Suddenly, compounding wasn't a vague concept described in abstract terms. It became a series of predictable steps he could track and trust. And here's what makes this even more compelling. The shortcut doesn't just show how a single doubling works. Later you'll see what happens when that first $10,000 keeps doubling again and again over the span of decades, and how adding consistent monthly contributions can amplify the results even further. Could money really grow into hundreds of thousands without a sudden inheritance or a stroke of luck? That question stayed with Gabriel as he began to see the real strength of the Rule of 72. The real strength of the Rule of 72 lies in how powerfully it reveals compounding over time. For Gabriel, the numbers stopped being abstract once he laid them out as a simple timeline. Starting with $10,000 at a 12% annual return, the rule shows a doubling every 6 years. That means by age 34, his $10,000 becomes $20,000. At 40, it reaches $40,000. By 46, it's $80,000. At 52, it jumps to $160,000. And by 58, the same seed has grown into $320,000, all without adding a single extra cent. The pace in the early years might feel sluggish. 6 long years just to double a small amount can be deflating. But here's the point most people miss. Compounding is not steady growth in a straight line. It snowballs. The first doubling from 10,000 to 20,000 looks minor. Yet every cycle after that multiplies larger and larger numbers. The leap from 80,000 to 160,000 creates more new money in 6 years than Gabriel had put in at the very beginning. The later doublings are where momentum transforms into real wealth. Now, imagine if Gabriel didn't rely only on the original $10,000, he was already setting aside $300 each month. Directing that toward investments means layering consistent contributions on top of the compound growth already in motion, and when you run the numbers, the outcome is clear. Over 30 years, this steady habit could push his total well past $500,000, not from luck, not from a windfall, but from the patient combination of discipline and time. Here's where you should pause and make this personal. Think about your own numbers. What if you contributed just a few hundred each month? How many doubling periods could you capture if you gave compounding 20 or 30 years to work in your favor? The key isn't perfection or huge deposits, it's consistency. Each monthly contribution acts as one more spark added to the engine, and those sparks keep stacking over decades until the fire is much larger than it first appeared. The emotional impact of this shift is just as important as the math. Early on, Gabriel still felt tied to his paycheck because those first years of growth were underwhelming compared to his bills. But once time passed and compounding began generating far larger sums, the dynamic changed. The growth from his investments started producing more each year than his own savings deposits ever could. His money was finally working harder than he was. That reality opened doors in his life. He no longer had to rely on working late hours or taking overtime just to get ahead. Instead, he could focus on projects that mattered more to him. Knowing the background growth of his portfolio created space to breathe. The freedom allowed for travel, time with loved ones, and the peace of knowing that every year his money's pace was accelerating, even if he did nothing but stay the course. The larger lesson here is simple but often overlooked. Time is the most powerful factor in building wealth. With patience and consistency, even average contributions turn into outcomes that feel extraordinary decades later. The path Gabriel chose highlights how compounding rewards those who stay invested long enough to experience the exponential lift. But not everyone makes that same choice. Some people facing the exact same starting point take a very different road. A road that leads to stress, stagnation, and missed opportunities. And it's only when you see both paths side by side that the importance of these decisions becomes hard to ignore. What if two people started in nearly the same spot with the same paychecks and opportunities, yet found themselves living in completely different financial realities 15 years later? That's the story of Gabriel and Marcos. On the surface, both had steady jobs and earned similar salaries, but the way each used those paychecks led to outcomes worlds apart. Gabriel made choices to invest consistently, applying the rule of 72 and letting compounding take over 1 year at a time. He drove an older car, kept housing costs manageable, and resisted buying new gadgets unless he could pay for them outright. Those decisions freed up money every month, and instead of letting it slip away, he put it into investments. The early years felt slow. Growth was modest. Balances looked ordinary. But with time, those numbers doubled, then doubled again. By sticking to the plan, Gabriel built momentum and eventually reached a point where his money was working harder than he was. Marcos went in another direction. He believed investing was only for the rich, so when Gabriel brought it up, he brushed it off. Each raise became an excuse to upgrade his lifestyle. The newest phone, the gaming console, or a car that stretched his budget. He leaned on financing and credit cards, convincing himself he'd pay it off later. In reality, balances grew faster than he could reduce them, and the interest he paid to banks erased any chance of savings. The purchases brought short bursts of satisfaction, but no lasting financial return. His paycheck moved in and out of his account each month, leaving little behind. Now, fast forward 15 years, Gabriel's investments generate passive income through dividends and growth. Even if he stepped away from his job, his money continues compounding in the background. That translates into more security, more options, and less pressure to exchange every hour of his life for cash. Marcos, meanwhile, still works hard, but feels trapped. Debt payments, credit card bills, and car loans claim most of what he earns before he can make progress. His financial reality hasn't changed much from the day he started working, and stress has become a constant part of his daily life. The striking part isn't that either man had a higher salary starting out. Their different outcomes didn't come from income. It came from behavior. Gabriel believed small, steady contributions could matter if he gave them enough time. Marcos believed that waiting wasn't possible, so he kept spending for immediate gratification. One mindset built freedom, the other created exhaustion. Gabriel feels calm and secure while Marcos is still burdened by the weight of bills and obligations. Here's where the lessons fit for anyone watching. Which of these stories feels closer to yours? Take a moment to think about it and tell us in one sentence in the comments whether your habits feel more like Gabriel's or Marcos's. That reflection is worth more than numbers alone, because recognizing your own path is the first step toward choosing where you want it to lead. And that brings us to the real turning point, because when you strip away details, the heart of this decision is bigger than gadgets or paychecks. It comes down to what you do with time. For Gabriel, time became the engine that multiplied his efforts. For Marcos, time only magnified the cost of delay. What you take from this story is a reminder that the choice isn't about income, not really. It's about what you decide to do with the years and opportunities you already have. That choice is the doorway to what comes next. The rule of 72 isn't just a formula, it's a lens for decision-making. It shows the difference between money sitting idle and money working toward freedom. Once you see how doubling works, you realize your future is less about income and more about starting now. The best first move is simple. Open an investment account or set up an automatic transfer. Even $50 each month makes a difference. If you think you can't start, remember, some platforms let you begin with as little as $10. Consistency plus time is the real multiplier. It's not magic, it's math. 72, your return equals years to double. Share your first step in the comments, and if this helped, hit like and subscribe so others can find this too.